Hello everyone, it's Incredimations here. Today, I'm going to do another animation challenge. Now, what is the challenge? Well, it's creating an animation on only 12 frames per second. 12 frames per second means that for every second that lasts in the animation, it'll have 12 different drawings in it. The biggest rule that I'll restrict on myself is that I'm not allowed to add any extra frames to make the animation feel more smooth, nor retract any frames to make it feel snappier or choppier. Whenever I usually animate, I do a mix of 12 frames per second for most frames, 24 frames per second for fast motion, and 8 frames per second for choppier and more precise motion. But today, we'll see what an animation of mine will look solely on 12 frames per second. Alrighty everyone, let's start the challenge. So before I show you my process, I'm actually going to show you what the finished animation looked like so you can have a clear idea as to what I'm describing in your head. Alright, so at the start of the animation, I wanted to have Nick in a confident pose, like just basically like standing confidently, having the camera look up towards him in a worm's eye view. And I've noticed that I don't usually animate like this. I noticed how drawing Nick in a worm's eye view at the start was a little bit tricky, but I figured it all out and it all turned out quite well. And afterwards, I just showed Nick going down towards the ground in preparation for his jump. I really wanted to use the lines in the background to really mimic a 3D space. Yeah, I felt like that I showed it quite well with the simple grid pattern in the background. I think it gives enough information to show that there's a camera and it's pointing up at Nick at the start and then it goes down and prepares him for the jump. After I was done drawing the frame where Nick was preparing to jump, I decided to show the key frame to when he is actually in the sky. So I wanted to connect the two frames with Nick on the ground and then him going up into the sky. So I decided to mostly wing it between these frames and add the frames as I go on. I found that it really helped connect the frames together to really emphasize Nick's jump. Next, I decided to add a few frames here and there before moving on to the part where Nick curls into a ball. So during this part, I actually wasn't sure where Nick's legs were supposed to go initially. I initially made Nick's legs go quite far out, but I figured that it didn't look right, so I moved it closer in, and it definitely gave a stronger appearance for curling up into a ball for him. Afterwards, I wanted to add some squash and stretch for his legs for the next few frames. I really felt like that this really emphasized the arc that I wanted Nick to go in when he curls into a ball. And I also think it strongly helps the transition of Nick's legs going from straight down to being bent. Next, I moved on to the part where Nick starts falling from the sky. In this part, I initially struggled with the perspective of it because I'm having the camera once again go below Nick to emphasize the fact that he's falling from the sky. So to help out with this, I decided to emphasize the foot and make that the focal point of the animation. I found that having a focal point really helped out the perspective of this animation. And I also decided to have all of Nick in the camera so he can remain fully in focus. In addition to this, I also added lavender stars falling from the sky to really help show Nick falling. After I worked on the part where Nick fell from the sky, I wanted to work on the part where it shows Nick land on the ground. For this part it was kind of tricky to show the scene cut from Nick falling from the sky to Nick landing on the ground because I wanted to show the ground for a bit before I showed Nick. However, that would obviously break the rules of the 12 frames per second challenge because I can't use the same frame twice. It has to be at least a little bit different for each frame. So what I did instead is that I added Nick's foot just barely in the second frame where you could see Nick falling for a little bit to make it feel like there's a pause even though there isn't. So that bit of subtlety still filled in the rules of the challenge while also still feeling like a pause. And after Nick lands on the ground, I wanted to show him a little bit unbalanced for some comedic effect. I found it was a lot of fun. At this point I was almost finished with the sketch layer. I just wanted to do one more little thing that Nick did. Yeah, I just wanted Nick to regain his balance when he was a little bit unbalanced, so I wanted to add a few frames here and there, and then after that I was done the sketch layer. Next, I moved on to the outline. Honestly, I don't have too much to say about the outline. I mostly just traced over the line work I already did for the sketch layer, There was one smear frame in the animation I wanted to emphasize stronger when Nick was unbalanced. What I did to emphasize this stronger is that I made Nick have multiple arms for one of the frames to make it look like that he's waving his arms up and down really quickly to highlight his unbalanced state. But yeah, I did that illusion quite well, and I'm really happy with how the outline turned out. And finally, the last thing I did was working on the colors for the background and Nick. So near the start of the video I have with Nick, I worked on the background floor, and I made it a very light lime green type color. Afterwards, I worked on the changing colors that you could see while Nick jumps into the sky. I initially tried animating this without the guidelines, but I realized that these lines in the background add a lot to the animation, so I decided to keep it. It really makes the background lines feel a lot more unified and structured. I also kept the lines in for when the stars come down when Nick falls to the ground. Like, this also helps it feel very stylized and structured. And after I was done, I moved on to coloring Nick. Coloring him in really didn't take too much time, nor is there really too much to say about it, so I just basically filled in the outlines and I was done the animation. And there it is, the 12 frames per second challenge is complete. I really enjoyed creating this animation. It was a fun challenge trying to capture fast motion with a slower frame rate, like when Nick curled into a ball, and also slower motion with a fast frame rate, like when Nick was rising up. It was quite a nice challenge that really got me to experiment with my animation style. If you have any ideas for future videos, leave them down in the comments. I hope you all have a wonderful day and see you in the next video.